Welcome back, Rebel. If you're new here, Episode 3 introduced you to the tape. Episode 4 is where the plan gets specific. This is Escape the Medical Matrix, the audiobook by Dr. Vic Naumov. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved. Episode 4. This is the second of 3 tapes recorded by Dr. Lawrence Dunnigan in 1988. His recollection of what Dr. Richard Day told a room of pediatricians back in 1969. Same rules as last time. No notes, no recorders, and decades later, one man's memory of what he heard. I'm your narrator for this journey, and this is Dr. Vic Naumov, in his own words. Let's begin. The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is your enemy. But when you're inside, you look around. What do you see? Businessmen, doctors, teachers, lawyers, carpenters. The very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so injured, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Morpheus, speaking to Neo, from the movie The Matrix. This is tape 2 of 3. Dunnigan, a Pittsburgh pediatrician, recalls Dr. Richard Day continuing his 1969 address, still under the same instruction given to the room: no note-taking, no recorders. According to Dunnigan, Day described constant change as a deliberate tool. Streets rerouted and renamed, neighborhoods made unfamiliar, buildings left standing empty and decaying in some areas by design, so that instability itself would wear people down. Dunnigan recalled Day suggesting that bridges and buildings would be engineered to fail over time, and that this claim stuck with him years later, watching news of bridge collapses and structural failures around the country. I want to be direct here. This is Dunnigan's recollection of a claim, not an engineering fact I can verify, and I present it as part of his account, not as something proven. Dunnigan recalled Day describing a strategy of deliberately created slums alongside well-kept areas, designed, he said, so that crime could largely be contained to poorer neighborhoods, while wealthier areas justified expanded private security and policing. Dunnigan recalls Day introducing a term he'd never heard before that night: global interdependence. The idea, as Dunnigan remembers it, was that American industrial dominance would be deliberately curtailed to let other nations, Japan was named specifically, build up their own industries, even if it meant American-made products were made to feel less reliable by comparison, eroding consumer patriotism over time. Dunnigan recalls Day discussing population shifts toward the Sunbelt, arguing that people uprooted from their hometowns would more easily accept new systems, including new models of medical care, than people with deep community roots. Dunnigan noted Day's use of "we" when describing control, beginning in port cities like New York, San Francisco, and Seattle, with the expectation that the heartland would eventually follow. According to Dunnigan, even American sports culture was discussed as a lever. Soccer promoted as an international unifying sport. Baseball potentially phased out by inflating player salaries until public resentment set in. Football likely preserved because of what Day allegedly called society's need for vicarious violence. Girls' sports, Dunnigan recalls, would be pushed to reshape how young girls saw their own future. Athlete over mother, as he put it. On guns, Dunnigan recalls Day treating hunting as an inadequate justification for private ownership, suggesting that gun access would be increasingly restricted over time. Dunnigan's recollection turns to entertainment next, describing predictions that films and television would grow more sexually explicit and more graphically violent, deliberately in order to desensitize audiences over time. Dunnigan recalled a chilling phrase attributed to Day, that people would eventually need to be desensitized to real human casualties. Music, Day reportedly said flatly, would get worse, become more explicit, more generationally divisive, with messages young listeners wouldn't consciously register. According to Dunnigan, older generations would be given comforts, familiar music, old films, small privileges, specifically because they were considered a fading, unchangeable group. The true target, Day allegedly said, was the young, still forming, still capable of being shaped for the century ahead. Dunnigan's recollection grows darker here. He recalls Day describing a future national identification system, starting as a physical card, but eventually an implant embedded under the skin, using a material like silicon for identification that couldn't be lost, faked, or transferred. Dunnigan says he didn't recognize the biblical parallel at the time. It was only later, reading the Book of Revelation, that the implications struck him. I want to be clear. This is Dunnigan's recollection of a proposed concept from 1969. Not a documented technology I can verify was implemented as described. Dunnigan recalls Day describing television sets that could monitor viewers without being turned off, arriving quietly through what we now know as cable service, a claim again that I present strictly as part of his recollection. According to Dunnigan, private home ownership itself was framed as something that would gradually disappear. Costs held artificially high, young buyers pushed permanently into renting, dissent eventually met with disappearance rather than public martyrdom. People will just disappear, Dunnigan recalls Day saying, with no further elaboration. Dunnigan also recalls far more extreme claims in this section, ones I present only as his recollection, entirely uncorroborated and not something I assert as fact. He said Day described weather modification as a potential weapon of war and policy. He described a possible engineered financial collapse and a cashless, fully electronic banking system. And most strikingly, Dunnigan recalled Day suggesting that if enough resistance remained to a new global governing system, 1 or 2 nuclear detonations might be used to force compliance, framed, chillingly, as a way to convince a reluctant population that negotiators meant business. I have no way to verify this claim occurred as described, and I share it here only as part of a historical document I'm examining, not as something I believe is presently true or imminent. Dunnigan recalls Day discussing terrorism as a tool used abroad, one that could be deployed domestically if the United States resisted the broader plan too slowly. He recalls a comment that Americans, in Day's words, had it too good, and that a measure of fear might be useful in shifting public opinion toward accepting centralized authority. Dunnigan closes his recollection with something quieter. The timing, he says, Day predicted for any final transition. A weekend in winter, everything shut down Friday evening, a new system simply announced come Monday morning. And then Dunnigan's own reflection, not Day's. To put faith in God, to inform whoever will listen, and to hold on to liberty and justice. Not the vaguer language of peace and justice, he says, had already become a cliché by 1988. That's the second tape. Some of what you just heard lines up unsettlingly well with what followed in the decades since. Some of it, the weather control, the staged nuclear detonation, I cannot verify at all, and I don't ask you to simply accept it as fact. I ask you to hold it up against what you've watched happen in your own lifetime and decide for yourself what fits and what doesn't. That's episode 4 of Escape the Medical Matrix. The system Dunnigan describes doesn't announce itself all at once. It arrives one small change at a time, until one day you look up and it's already there. Hit like on this video right now. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this tape matched something you've actually lived through. Share this with someone who still thinks all of this sounds far-fetched. And if you haven't already, subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on notifications. So the second this rebellion drops its next episode, you're the first to know. I'm narrating for Dr. Vic Naumov. This has been Escape the Medical Matrix. Stay awake, stay free.